The next item of business is a statement by Michael Matheson on rail update. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement, so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on Michael Matheson for 10 minutes, please, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to take this opportunity to update Parliament on the ScotRail franchise contract. The benefits that our railways bring are well rehearsed. They help our economy grow. They connect our cities and our communities with jobs, education, health services and leisure activities. They enable our visitors to explore all that Scotland has to offer. And they help reduce the impact on our environment of moving people and goods. Our commitment to investing in rail is unquestionable. We have spent over £8 billion since 2007, and we will spend over £5 billion between 2019 and 2024. This investment is delivering new services and new and refurbished trains and infrastructure improvements that will increase capacity and improve reliability. Since last weekend, growing communities in the north of Glasgow have had access to the new station at Rob Royston. The December 2019 timetable change, which happened during this week, has resulted in an additional 10,000 seats on the network every day, meaning extra carriages on our Edinburgh to Glasgow routes and on our busy peak time Fife and Borders services, and additional services in the North East to maximise the benefits of our infrastructure investment. And since the start of the franchise in 2015, we have increased capacity by around 125,000 seats per day across the network. It's therefore vital that as we make those considerable investments, we do so in a way which ensures best value both for passengers and for taxpayers. The current ScotRail franchise contract commenced in 2015. As required under the current legislative framework, the Scottish Government let the contract through open commercial competition. Under the terms of the contract, in its fifth year, both the Scottish Government and Abellio ScotRail must revisit costs and revenue assumptions. Those assumptions provided the basis for the franchise subsidy levels set at the start of the contract in 2015, and we must consider whether they should be revised. This is referred to as the rebasing process. In this process, the Scottish Government and Abellio ScotRail could agree to rebase and continue with the contract until March 2025 on the basis of revised revenue and cost inputs that would determine future franchise subsidy levels. Alternatively, either party could issue a no rebasing notice, which means that the revenue and cost assumptions which determine subsidy levels remain as they are, and the contract comes to an end at an earlier point, which would be expected to be March 2022. The rebasing process commenced on the 1st of October this year, and a decision on whether to serve a no rebasing notice is required by no later than the 31st of December. My officials have undertaken extensive and rigorous analysis of the information provided by Abellio ScotRail about the rebasing option and commercial issues concerning a 10-year franchise term. As well as considering the effects on passengers, there has been a detailed and thorough analysis of the key financial, legal, economic and operational aspects. Of critical importance to the measure to measure the information provided against the policy principles that underpin the franchise, which include value for money, passenger satisfaction, and fully exploiting the utility and capacity of the rail network. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the team at Abellio ScotRail for the proposal they have made and the wide range of information they have provided in support, which has allowed me to consider the range of issues that are pertinent to the rebasing decision. After careful consideration, Scottish ministers have decided not to rebase the contract. We are not satisfied that the significant increase in public subsidy that would otherwise be required would generate commensurate benefits for passengers, communities and the economy. As such, we do not consider that rebasing would secure the delivery of the policy objectives that underpin the current franchise. I can confirm that I have today issued a notice to inform Abellio ScotRail of the decision. Therefore, the current franchise agreement is expected to come to an end in March 2022. The existing provisions within the franchise agreement continue as they are set out in the contract, and we will be working closely with Abellio ScotRail to ensure the delivery of the requirements of the franchise, including performance and service quality. We will also ensure that we maximise the benefits of our significant investment in our railways in order to provide the best possible services for passengers and to support growth. There have been both successes and challenges over the first 5 years of the franchise, and we have maintained a good working relationship with Abellio ScotRail throughout that period. I fully expect that this will continue for the remainder of the contract and that they will support us in the delivery of our ambitious programme of transformation on Scotland's railways. Presiding Officer, I believe that the decision I've advised the Parliament of today in respect of the ScotRail franchise is the right one for passengers, communities, the economy and for taxpayers. It is, of course, necessary to plan for the future and future provision of ScotRail services. And I can confirm that work has already been undertaken to examine the options open to Scottish ministers after the current contract comes to an end. This will, of course, mean regular engagement with trade unions and with other stakeholders. Looking further ahead, I fully expect that changes to the structure of railways, not just in Scotland, but across the whole of the UK, will take place as a consequence of the UK Rail Review undertaken by Keith Williams. While we await the outcome of the review, I very much hope it will see an end to the present complex and costly franchising system for rail services. Presiding Officer, for now, services will, of course, continue to operate. Abellio ScotRail remain contractually committed to delivering quality rail services. This government has made significant investment in our railways, and we will ensure that we maximise the benefits for passengers and for taxpayers. And I want to conclude by recognising the role of ScotRail staff, their continued hard work and commitment to delivering Scotland's essential services to the people of Scotland. Thank you.
The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in his statement, and I intend to allow around 20 minutes for that. There's already a lot of indication of people wishing to ask questions. I would ask everyone to be as concise as possible and to make sure, if you do wish to ask a question, to press your request to speak button. I first of all call Jamie Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I start by paying tribute to the thousands of people who work on Scotland's railway, many of whom will be watching this statement, given that they were given no formal notice in advance of today and will be learning of this decision as it is being made by the Cabinet Secretary. Can I ask a number of questions which today's statement raises? The first, what engagement did the Government have with the current operator in advance of today in coming to this decision? Leading on from that, what analysis has been undertaken as to the consequences of the decision to terminate the contract early, specifically in terms of potential job losses? If the decision taken today will have any effect on services currently provided by Abellio, what analysis, Cabinet Secretary, has been done on the effect this decision will have on current and future investment plans for Scotland's railway between now and 2022? But the most important question today the public will rightfully be asking us is who will be running their railway post-2022? Nothing in today's statement gave any insight as to what the Government's plans are, other than examine options. Cabinet Secretary, surely you should have examined options before terminating the existing contract. Today's statement answers one question, but raises plenty more. The public rightfully will be concerned and surely deserves answers.
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, can I say, just given the initial comment that Jamie Green made in relation to the hundreds of thousands of staff that work with the ScotRail and giving no advance notice of this announcement, my responsibility is to report it first to the Parliament. And that's exactly what I've done. Had I not done so, I suspect you would have been on your feet demanding answers as to why it was in the public domain before I'd come in here and made a statement to Parliament. So that's the reality of the situation, making sure that Parliament is informed of these matters. The member asked the question about what engagement is undertaken been taken with Abellio ScotRail in regard to this decision. As I've just set out in my statement, Abellio ScotRail made a submission to the Scottish Government through Transport Scotland for the rebasing proposal. That has undergone very rigorous, detailed analysis in order to come to this particular decision around rebasing. This is a requirement within the franchise agreement to undertake the rebasing exercise. It has to be undertaken. There are no two ways about it. And that's what has been undertaken, a very detailed analysis of the proposal that's been put to us by Abellio ScotRail. So I can assure the member it's been a very thorough and detailed one. The member then asked about the consequences for potential jobs within Abellio ScotRail. As it stands, the contract we would expect to continue for the remaining 2 years. As has been the case in previous contracts, staff transfer to any new operator that takes over a new franchise, as was the case back in 2015. But one of the things that we have in our franchise agreement, which is not something which the Department of Transport pursue with franchise agreements down south, is that there is a no compulsory redundancy provision within our franchise agreement, and that remains to be in place and is a commitment that continues to be applied to Abellio ScotRail. The member made, and I'll take the two remaining points in relation to current services and future investments. Let me just say, current services will continue as they stand at the present moment, because the contract we would expect to be in place for the remaining 2 years. And in terms of investment, we're making record investment into rail in Scotland over the course of Control Period 6, and that will continue as normal. Services will continue to be delivered, projects will continue to be provided, and we will continue to see the transformation of our rail services going forward. And on his very final point about looking into the future, if there is a delay in deciding on what the future of rail services in Scotland and the rest of the UK would be, it is with the UK Government, because they've been sitting on the Williams Review since the autumn of this year. They could have published it. They could have published it back in October if they had chosen to do so. They chose not to do so. We are still waiting to see what the outcome of that is. Once we know what the outcome of that is, we'll have a better idea about what the scope will be we'll have here in Scotland to shape rail services in a way that reflects the needs of the Scottish people and the needs of the Scottish rail network.
Colin Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you to the Cabinet Secretary for the advance sight of his statement. Presiding Officer, since the start of this franchise, Abellio have failed to deliver for Scotland's hard-pressed passengers who have suffered delays, overcrowding, cancellations and fare hikes. Abellio have failed to meet their basic contractual requirements. They've breached the franchise on punctuality, cancellations and passenger satisfaction, and they have let down the hard-working ScotRail staff. So I'm glad that the Scottish Government are finally backing my calls and Scottish Labour's calls time and time again to end this failing franchise. Now, I know part of that failure is a fragmented, privatised railway system that should also end, and we await the outcome of the Williams Review to consider the exact nature of any contract that replaces the Abellio franchise. But can the Cabinet Secretary give a guarantee today that the Scottish Government will ensure that a public sector operator will be properly prepared and in a position to take on that contract so Scotland's railways can at last start to put passengers and not profits first?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, can I thank the member for his comments. I did say to Jamie Green that in considering the rebasing proposal put to us by ScotRail, we did have a very detailed, thorough analysis of their submission. I can confirm, though, Mr Smith, that your personal views on this issue did not factor into that assessment. It was purely based upon the rebasing process in itself. What I can say, though, to the member's second point in relation to the public sector bid, Mr Smith doesn't seem to wish to acknowledge or recognise is that our hands are tied at the present moment, and our only option is to have a franchise bid for rail services in Scotland. What we have is the scope for a public sector body to be able to bid for a franchise agreement against other parties who are bidding for any franchise that is let by the Scottish Government. Now, he may be quite happy to continue with franchising. I'm certainly not. I want to get rid of franchising so that we can actually have a public sector service in Scotland that reflects the needs of the people of Scotland, as I've previously stated in this chamber. So I can assure the member that we'll be doing everything we can to make sure that we get the powers here in Scotland to determine what the future shape of Scotland's railways will be. And I very much hope that we'll get the support of the Labour Party in demanding that from the new Conservative Government, that all powers over rail should be devolved to this Parliament so we can reflect them in a way that reflects the needs of the Scottish rail network.
We'll move to open questions, and I do have a lot of requests. John Finney to be followed by Mike Rumbles.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for early sight of his statement and warmly welcome the end of the franchise, and more on the fact that we can't go straight to nationalisation, and hope that the Labour Party and others will call for the full devolution. It's important that trade unions are involved going ahead, Cabinet Secretary, and I hear what you say about franchising. That is the view we would want to go straight. But if franchising exists, will you assure us that you'll put a robust public sector bid together with no expansion of driver-only operations, and will you rule out following the hard-right UK Government's punitive employment proposals and guarantee that Scotland's rail workers have the full range of workplace rights, including the right to withdraw their labour?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, on the member's latter point, yes, I am aware of the concerns that have been raised, in particular in relation to the proposed changes that the UK Government are suggesting that should be introduced, the legislative changes in order to curb the rights of transport workers and be able to take industrial action. I completely oppose that type of approach. The best way in which you deal with industrial relations matters is to nurture and culture positive industrial relations rather than resorting to legislative changes in this way, in a punitive approach that the UK Government are intending to take. So I can assure the member that's not something which is in our thinking or the approach that we will take. Yes, of course, there will be a robust public sector bid if we are confined to nothing other than a public sector bid for a franchise. But I am conscious that that's a costly exercise for a public sector organisation. That could cost it some £10 million, and it is bidding against potentially other parties as well, which is why we need to get rid of franchising for rail services. It's costly, it's complex, and it does not serve the public well, which is why we need to have all the powers over rail here in this Parliament to determine the way and shape of our rail services going forward. So I can give the member an assurance on both the points which he's made.
Mike Rumbles, followed by Willie Coffey.
Well, this is very good news indeed, and I very much welcome the decision to end Abellio ScotRail's contract. It is something the Liberal Democrats have been calling for, and he's done it, the Minister has done it, at the earliest practical opportunity, and I congratulate him for making that very wise decision. But my question focuses on what action will the government now take to make sure that there is stronger protection for customers in the future contract, and will it provide more breakpoints in the new contract to ensure that there's a better chance to correct poor performance? That's what we're concerned about, poor performance earlier on in a new contract.
Michael Matheson.
I'm grateful to the comments from Mike Rumbles in this matter. I think the member has touched upon a very important issue. First of all, I don't want to start speculating about any future contract on the basis that I'm hoping that if what I've heard that the Williams Review contains, that this could be the end of franchising of this nature. And therefore, there may be an opportunity for us to look at arranging rail services in a fundamentally different way, which can help to address some of the very issues that the member has highlighted. But I think he's also touched upon something which is much more fundamental in our rail services. So, for example, if we look at the way in which the regulatory function operates through the ORR, I think at times it is too slow at picking up poor performances in rail infrastructure and TOC operations, and in taking proactive action to address these matters in a way. So I think the regulatory function needs to change to get much more passenger focused and improving services for passengers. Equally, alongside that, there is a need to see greater alignment between infrastructure and passenger services. Too often, infrastructure is dealt with as in it's the heavy rail industry aspects of it. It is not passenger focused enough as well, and there's a need for it to be aligned, much more aligned in a way so they are much more passenger focused. And I hope, given the discussions I had with Keith Williams, given what I've heard are the key issues that apparently have been set out for the UK government to consider taking forward within the Williams Review, which I hope they do take forward. It's a political decision in the end, but if they do, could fundamentally allow us to change things in such a way that addresses the very issues that the members make in reference to be much more passenger focused and to align these types of issues much more effectively. And I'm certainly prepared to work with members across the chamber to try and seek to do that, should the powers be devolved to this Parliament to allow us to do that.
Can I say, Cabinet Secretary, I know your answers are fulsome and probably appreciated, but they're rather long and it is going to cut out some questions. Could bear that in mind. We have Willie Coffey, followed by Liam Kerr.
Thank you. Can I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's statement? He will be aware of my continuing interest in supporting the improvement of rail services from Kilmarnock and Ayrshire as a whole to Glasgow and Edinburgh. And his recent visit to Kilmarnock to meet with industry representatives also highlighted the potential that electrification would bring for that local economy. Could you give me some indication as to how he sees that now moving forward, given his announcement today?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, I'm aware of Willie Coffey's particular interest, given that both Wabtec and Brodie's have a base in his constituency, which I had the pleasure of visiting fairly recently. As we have set out within our programme for government, our ambition to see our rail network being decarbonised, a key part of that will be greater electrification. And what we will do is we'll set out in the next couple of months our plans for how we intend to go about that. That will include looking at the electrification of a range of different parts of the existing network. I can't give a commitment specifically to Kilmarnock at the present moment in the way in which the member is seeking, but what I can assure him is that our plans for infrastructure investment will continue, given the record investment we've set out in the Control Period 6.
Liam Kerr, followed by Jenny Gilruth.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Performance concerns have many causes, such as 40% of cancellations are caused by tracker signalling, 10% caused by non-ScotRail operators, 20% caused by weather or circumstances outside of control, or passenger incidents. This decision doesn't begin to address any of these, and if anything, it makes it worse. Isn't it really the case, Presiding Officer, that what is really happening here is that the franchisee is a convenient scapegoat for the SNP's failure to understand the challenges of running a railway, and this decision sets up any future franchisee or operator for failure?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, that is a bit rich from the Conservative Party. Week in, week out, they come in here slagging off ScotRail, time and time again, demanding better services. every time I raise the fact that the vast majority of delays and cancellations on the network in Scotland are caused by infrastructure issues that are the responsibility of Network Rail, that is the responsibility of the UK Government, they boo me and say it's just an excuse to cover for ScotRail. Now they're trying to defend them as well. At least be consistent in the matter if you're going to stand up and make any comment about rail services in Scotland. But the real answer to Mr Kerr's question here is whether his government are going to be committed to the recommendations that Keith Williams has made in his review. Because ultimately, his review will be a political decision on whether there should be a fundamental change in the way in which our rail services operate. Getting rid of franchising, allowing different models for the provision of rail services, making sure that we align infrastructure, just in the way in which he mentioned, infrastructure and passenger services are much more aligned in order to be much more passenger focused. And if that is the case, then we'll be in a position to be able to make those decisions here in this Parliament. So I hope in recognising what the challenges are with the infrastructure challenges we have within the Scottish route, that he will be prepared to recognise that they should become the responsibility of this Parliament, and we should be able to align them in such a way with our passenger services that improves passenger satisfaction levels overall. I hope he will be big enough to do that. Time will tell and see where he actually is.
Jenny Gilruth, followed by Jackie Bailey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary provide any further detail on whether his decision has implications for the current Abellio contract between now and 2022?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, the existing franchise agreement and the content of the contract continues to be in place, and Abellio can continue to be held to account with the various levers that we have within the contract in order to hold them to account for any areas where we've got concerns or where they may be failing.
Jackie Bailey, followed by Stuart McMillan.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for the early Christmas present to the hard-pressed commuters in my area and welcome his recognition of Scottish Labour's campaign highlighting the myriad problems with the rail service. Commuters in Helensburgh, Balloch and Dumbarton experiencing delays, cancellations, stop-skipping and short-form trains with passengers crammed in like sardines. But these problems continue today. So can the Cabinet Secretary tell me what assurances he will give to my constituents about the level of service they will receive from now until March 2022, when the Abellio contract finally comes to an end?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, I'm very pleased to give Jackie Bailey's constituents an early Christmas present, if that's how she views the matter. Can I say this is purely a decision which is made on the rebasing requirement within the franchise agreement in itself. What I can say to the member, I recognise the concerns and issues that the members had around services within her area, part of which are addressed through the Donovan review, where work is still being progressed and that's been monitored independently in order to ensure that continued progress has been made with that. I'm sure the member, despite the problems that continue to be in the network, she will recognise that there have been improvements made in terms of addressing a range of various issues on the network, which certainly has been the case that have been provided as a result of the Donovan review. And alongside that, the remedial plan which we'll put in place for improvements that ScotRail have to take forward as well. Equally, there are measures that Network Rail need to undertake as well in improving reliability. I know there have been particular issues on the line to Dumbarton which have failed on a number of occasions, and we need to make sure that Network Rail are doing everything they can to minimise these type of recurring problems taking place on the route into Dumbarton or in any other part of the Scottish network. So all of the provisions which are in the franchise agreement at the present moment continue to be there. They will continue to be enforced. We will continue to work with Abellio, ScotRail in making sure that they're held to account for these matters, and I can assure her that we'll continue to give focus on making sure that they address concerns where they're raised about passenger services.
Stuart McMillan, followed by Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary mentioned the UK Rail Review, and how will he take this into consideration for the future of rail services when it's eventually published?
Michael Matheson.
Sir, we had been hoping to have the outcome of the UK Rail Review in the autumn of this year. It was anticipated possibly in October. It was delayed by the UK Government. We still await the outcome from that. I've had very positive engagement with Keith Williams on a number of occasions. He recognises the very specific demands that we have here in Scotland, and I was always very welcoming of his sympathetic approach to the issues for the Scottish rail network. I hope that politically the UK Government will make the right decision now and will allow us to have the range of powers in Scotland, the running of rail services, that allow us to look at a variety of different models for how rail services are provided. And I would hope that they would publish that review and the outcomes of that review in the next coming few weeks.
If Rachel Hamilton's quick, I'll manage to get John Mason in. Rachel
Thank you,
Hamilton.
Presiding Officer. In October of this year, Dominic Booth, Managing Director of Abellio UK, said Scotland's railway needs stability and not the upheaval a change in the franchise would bring about. Can the Cabinet Secretary explain why bringing in what is effectively a break clause will not lead to further uncertainty for passengers on the Borders Rail and across Scotland, as well as the hard-working staff and job security?
Michael Matheson.
Well, President Officer, I hope the member will welcome the significant improvement there has been in border rail services, including increasing capacity being provided as part of the December timetable change. I should point out to the members, as I said in my statement, this is part of the rebasing process that is set out within the franchise agreement. The issue about the debate earlier this year was very much about just ending the franchise, and that's it. This is about the rebasing process, which is a very technical, detailed process that's been undertaken with a very detailed analysis being carried through. So it comes as no surprise to Abellio ScotRail. They submitted a rebasing notice to us, and we've made an assessment of that. And that's why we have come to the decision, based upon the significant cost increase that would be associated with that. We do not believe that that would be commensurate with improving services for passengers, given the additional cost it would have to taxpayers. But I certainly will be looking to work with Dominic Booth and his colleagues at Abellio ScotRail over the course of the next 2 years to make sure that we maximise the benefits of the existing franchise while they remain part of it.
John Mason.
Very much. In recent years, Cabinet Secretary, there have been huge improvements in the rail service, certainly between Glasgow and Edinburgh. We now have 5 electrified lines. We have the 385s, which I think are tremendous trains, and there's more seats and there's less overcrowding than there used to be. Will all of these improvements carry on, whatever happens?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, all of those commitments that were set out as part of our plan for investment in this franchise and also for infrastructure investments will continue as part of the franchise as we go forward, and also in Control Period 6. So I can give the member that assurance. We want to build on the very significant improvements we saw in rail over the course of the last decade or so, and to make sure that we continue to build on that in the years to come.
I can squeeze in a quick question from Claire Baker.
Thank you. I very much welcome the announcement today, but as we enter the severe winter period and the contract will last until 2022 and my constituents are about to face a price hike in the cost of their fares, what guarantees can I give them that they will no longer continue to have to put up with a substandard service?
And a quick answer from the Cabinet Secretary,
well,
please.
Presiding Officer, the member will be aware that we have put a remedial plan specifically in place to address concerns and issues about performance within the Fife Circle area, and as a result of that, we have saw marked improvements, reductions in cancellations, improvement in punctuality, and also increasing seat capacity as well, which has actually additionally just come in as a course of the December timetable change. There is certainly more to do, because some of the real benefits we want to see being delivered within the Fife Circle area are dependent on the HSTs being delivered by Wabtec and by Angel Trains, which will increase capacity even further. And I would hope as we go forward into the May timetable that we will see further improvements as a result of increasing capacity on the Fife Circle.
That concludes questions on the statement on the rail update. I'm sorry I wasn't able to reach Rona Mackay or Neil Finlay, and we'll move on to the next item of business.